This is a Film Stories original podcast. Welcome to the Xcast X-Files Podwatch, episode 103. We're going to be covering the second film, I Want to Believe. I'm your host, Russ, and with me is Andrew Blaker. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Russ. How are you?
Well, doing particularly fine, and I'm looking forward to having a healthy debate on this film.
Absolutely.
I Want to Believe was directed by Chris Carter and produced and written by both Chris Carter and Frank Spotnitz. It was released in theaters July 25th, 2008, and had a budget of $30 million and pulled in a surprisingly healthy box office of $68.4 million. Andrew, would you mind providing us with a brief synopsis, if possible, of an entire film for us?
I'll give it a go, Russ.
Thank you.
So the film opens up with the abduction of an FBI agent, Monica Bannon, in snowy Virginia. We find Scully 6 years actually, after the events of the series finale, The Truth. She is a doctor at Our Lady of Sorrows Hospital in Virginia, and she and Mulder live together in rural Virginia. He is kind of a very Mulder-esque character, kind of keeps himself a bit reclusive, obsessed with the paranormal investigations, kind of hiding in their home, while Scully, like I said, is a medical doctor. They're pulled into the FBI again. Mulder is offered immunity for the actions that happened in the series finale if he helps them search for this missing agent. And they have a psychic who claims to have visions of what happened to this woman, Father Joe Chrisman, who is a convicted pedophile and former priest. And Mulder is drawn into the psychic visions of Father Joe, convinced that what he is saying is real, that he has merit to his claims. Scully is not so sure. There's a subplot while Scully is tied for a significant part of the movie to the hospital and to her work, helping to identify treatment and cure for Sandoff disease for a young patient that calls to mind memories of their son William that they gave up for adoption several years earlier. So that is the basic intro to the film. Hopefully that captures a majority of what you see during the film. Basically, Mulder and Scully are helping the FBI agents search for this missing woman, figure out what happened to her, which leads them to some pretty haunting modern-day Frankenstein-like discoveries of cutting-edge science and things like that.
Fantastic. Thanks for doing that. Thanks for taking that on. It's not always easy to summarize a film with that many plot threads running out there. Maybe to start off, we can just put our cards on the table. And what do you feel about the film? What's your opinion? And maybe also, what was your opinion when you first saw it? When did you first see it? And what's your opinion now?
Well, I do actually want to tell a quick little anecdote about when I saw this. I saw it opening weekend, July of 2008. And I had never seen a single episode of The X-Files before seeing this film. I did not know anything about The X-Files other than the fact that it had to do with aliens. And I went to the movies with a friend of mine, and that was the movie we happened to see because that was the movie that sounded the most interesting to both of us, honestly. And I knew nothing about the show, knew nothing about the characters, knew nothing about the mythology, and I really liked the movie. I just thought it was a well-done, creepy thriller, and needless to say, that made me a fan. I started watching the show, buying the used DVD sets, and just kind of eating the show up, and I was a fan ever since. So I loved the movie then, and I believe, for me, that the movie still holds up. I think it is a very underrated film, and I think some of the response that it got from fans and critics at the time of its release and since then is a little unfair. So for me, the film works on multiple levels, and I just think it's a pretty well-made film.
Well, I will respond to that by saying, first of all, I love the story, and I'm glad that somebody who had that introduction to the X-Files was on this podcast with me. So first of all, that's fantastic. Unfortunately, I was hoping to have somebody on the podcast who hated the film so we could have a more intense debate, but that is not to be. My introduction to this film is slightly roundabout, that I started out watching X-Files when it originally aired and kind of drifted away, and I saw Fight the Future in the theater. And this may be anathema, and I may get kicked off the X-Cast permanently for saying this, but I really did not like Fight the Future. And it, in fact, turned me off of the X-Files, and I stopped watching from that point on. It's a fine film. It's a wonderful spectacle. No arguments there, but at the time, I think just narratively it had some issues for me. I later, long time down the road, discovered Millennium and kind of went and became a bigger fan of that series. And I believe it was an article or an interview, I think it was maybe an interview with the media writer John Kenneth Muir on the Back to Frank Black podcasts, where they were discussing I Want to Believe and basically saying how it was, in all intents and purposes, the closest we would ever get to a Millennium movie. So I thought, I'll give it a shot. And I checked it out and was quite surprised with the film. We'll be talking about it, and there was a lot to like. There was enough there to inspire me to go back and revisit the X-Files, and I'm really glad I did. And so basically, in sort of a way for both of us, I Want to Believe was our path into the show, although for me it was back into it. And I do agree that I think it gets a very unfair berating by a lot of fans. It isn't perfect, as we'll see, but...
Yeah, no, like I said, it's not perfection, but I feel like it offers a lot that sometimes gets overlooked.
Well, let's maybe get into some of the finer points and the problematic aspects of this, because I think there is quite a bit we can discuss, so we'll just start talking and see where it goes. One thing I'd get your opinion on is the opening and the cold open, and whether you found that to be effective or how well it carries on the spirit of the X-Files. And maybe I want to frame that also in one of the big background snafus of this production people often talk about is the secrecy and the misdirection. So people going into this film blind and kind of imagining how then going in blind thinking it may be about the mythology or not, and then how it basically guides the viewer in. How effective do you think it was?
Yeah, I really like the opening of the film. Even from the opening credits onward through, like I said, we see the abduction of Monica Bannon, and we see the search ongoing for her by members of the FBI. I thought it was really well shot. I mean, instantly you're set up into the atmosphere, which is cold, chilly Virginia. I mean, they shot it in Vancouver, which doubles for pretty much anywhere in the nation. But you get a mix of the dark, the creepy, and then right away you're plunged into the world of the FBI. I thought it was a really good opening. It went between action and horror and the sci-fi really well, I thought. As far as the campaign that the crew and Chris and Frank undertook to try to keep the veil of secrecy going, I recently rewatched actually the behind-the-scenes features, which is like an hour or two long, and they talk about all the attempts at misdirection and sending out false spoilers and call sheets and even shooting fake photographs and to try to throw people off their trail. Some of it's probably a bit unwarranted, but I see this going on now with speculation about season 11. People are just thirsting for spoilers and are frustrated because they're not getting it right now. We're about 4 weeks into filming and we really don't know hardly anything about it. And that's how it was with I Want to Believe. I can understand people being upset with the fact that coming off of The Truth, the series finale, probably expecting a heavy-hitting mythology film that would touch on 2012 and themes of colonization, and then when you go to the theater and you have no idea what the film is about and you see this, I could understand some of the reaction that fans and critics had. I guess going in blind like I did, I didn't know anything about the series before or the myth arc or anything, so to me it didn't affect me, but I can appreciate some of the frustration shared by fans expecting something different.
I can agree with that in the sense that I can sympathize, being that that is what the X-Files was very much known for. In hindsight, actually looking at the transferring from The Truth to this, there are quite a few through lines plot-wise. Mulder being in isolation, there's a lot of nods and callbacks to the previous series. I think it actually does structurally continue fairly well. Mm-hmm. In the sense, hypothetically, go back to when the myth arc pretty much wrapped up initially. The Syndicate got killed off. But anyways, going back to that, I think if it's coming back after 5 years or however long it was.
Well, it was about 6. It was about 6 from the final episode.
Oh, okay.
6 and a couple months, but yeah.
6 and change. So if we're coming back around 6 months after the final episode, I think it's And again, with the budget limitations, it made a lot of sense to sort of restart the narrative with something a little bit smaller, a little bit quieter, Monster of the Week. But it's not just a Monster of the Week because it focuses so much on Mulder and Scully's relationship, and especially Mulder's motivation. It's a character piece, and that's the one thing about it that drew me to it that Fight the Future didn't have. Not to pick a fight between the two.
But no, you're right. I mean, it is a character piece. And at the time, the movie was intended all along to be a standalone piece. When Frank and Chris started planning the movie, not even a year after the series wrapped up. I mean, it started that early, and then there were lawsuits and contract negotiations, and things got indefinitely delayed. It went into development hell, and then finally, 6 years later, it came out. But the intention was always to do a standalone film, they said. And the plot was fairly similar in 2003 to what actually got filmed in 2007. There were changes, but it's a character piece, and if that ended up, which it very well could have been, the final chapter of the franchise, I feel like it did justice to the characters as well as the franchise to not be a mythology episode, but to be what the X-Files was best in its early seasons in Vancouver, focusing on the characters, the relationship, and the creepy paranormal themes that the show has at its base. So I think if you keep it in that perspective, again, with Season 10 and now Season 11, it's not. But at the time, it certainly looked like it might be, and so I think in that regard, it's a great character piece, and it really offers a realistic portrait of where Mulder and Scully are and how they got to where they are.
I agree. Those are all very good points. And going back to, you're saying it's a callback kind of to the heart of the X-Files. There's a lot of Vancouver spirit, not just in the environments that are shot and the fact that it's filmed in Vancouver, but you got a lot of familiar places coming back from even guest actors from Millennium and X-Files featured around the movie. So it really is a nice love letter in those instances. Rewatching it, so many people think it's disconnected to the overall narrative, but right off the bat, there's a lot of callbacks. You got the poster, you got the basketball trash toss when Scully goes to visit him. There's the picture of Samantha on the door. Samantha's referenced quite a bit throughout. Pencils on the ceiling, sunflower seeds. There's Luther Lee Boggs is called out, Clyde Bruckman, a lot of things. Since it is a character piece, the next thing I want to bring up and discuss with you is we have two new guest star FBI agents. Pete, who's playing Whitney, Agent Whitney, I think, who's in charge of the investigation, and then Exhibit, and that's the middle name, but we're going to shorten it there, who's playing Agent Drummy. And comparing this now to Season 10, we've got another analog where they were trying to do the same thing. Pete and Exhibit are gender-swapped versions of Mulder and Scully, comparable to Season 10's Miller and Einstein. I'm going to put my cards out on the table and say I think this was done much better. I like both of the actors and I like both of the characters in general. Not always flawless, but I think it was an effective, not too on-the-nose inversion, as in my opinion, Season 10 was very much almost a cartoonish inversion. What are your thoughts?
I wholeheartedly agree. Not to get too much into Season 10, but my biggest complaint with Miller and Einstein is it's like you said, it's too on the nose. It's almost parody of Mulder and Scully, and I feel like they don't exist in their own right as characters. They're caricatures, they're made for comic effect. Drummy and Dakota Whitney, they're characters in their own right, and I honestly didn't really think of the fact that they are Mulder and Scully in reverse roles, like you just pointed out. I hadn't really thought of that, but it's true. And the fact that I hadn't thought of that shows that it is not an overwhelming presentation of the characters. They're characters in their own right, and feel like that was one of the weaknesses in Season 10 with Miller and Einstein. They're kind of presented as, at first comedic relief, and once you introduce them that way, it's a little hard to buy them as serious characters, at least in my opinion.
I may even be stretching to say that they're exact gender swap, but just in the sense of the way that they approach the plot with the skepticism and the professionalism. They're obviously, like you said, they are their own characters. Drummy is not Scully in many ways, but simply the way that they're approaching the ideas and the casework and those kinds of things. And I also, not just even in the writing, I think the performances here are more effective, and perhaps that's just because of the tone of the piece. but I think they both did a good job. Although, one thing to kind of jump ahead to now and get your opinion is I thought the murder of Dakota Whitney is one of the lower points of the film. Not that it shouldn't have happened, but just in the way it did. For me, didn't fit the tone. Throughout the rest of the entire film, she's portrayed as being highly intelligent, her wits are about her, and then to kind of have such a casual attitude in that high intense situation, not have her wits about her, and then kind of an over-the-top death, being impaled by rebar. I'm not sure that was an effective plot point, but please debate.
I'd agree with that. I mean, even from the way it was shot, I mean, this film doesn't rely a lot on special effects, at least the obvious CGI special effects we've come to expect from a lot of blockbuster thrillers and action films today. And that segment did feel a little bit out of place, shot as it was in slow motion, obviously green screen the whole way, and I mean, yeah, I'm not saying the deaths shouldn't have happened. It's probably inevitable, but it did feel a little like it kind of it was a misstep in the film, in my opinion. Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Maybe for the next few minutes, we'll kind of run through and discuss some of the other characters and just get your thoughts on it. First of all, we've got our featured guest star, Billy Connolly, playing Father Joe. And I've read quite a few split opinions about his performance on the web, in the sense of a lot of dislike and a lot of like, very few kind of in the middle. Where do you sit on both the character, but also I am interested in how you feel his performance was?
Yeah, for Billy Connolly, I thought it was a great performance. I hadn't seen him in anything, and to be honest, I don't really know him from anything else. But that's my own fault. I thought he gave a great performance. I thought the character is repugnant. I mean, a pedophile, right? And you know that pretty much right off the bat. You're setting him up as this anti-hero, I guess, if you will. And yet the way he portrays the character is fascinating. I mean, I thought the character was really interesting. This came out not too long after the whole Catholic Church sex scandal that erupted in Boston, with the Boston Globe uncovering what it did. But the character is maybe a little stereotypical in the terms that it's a pedophilic priest experiencing these visions, but I felt like for a character it was pretty good, and his role in the film is also that to challenge Scully in the subplot with her and her young patient. Don't give up, he says to her. Don't give up searching for a treatment. Don't give up on your faith in science, your faith in what can be done for this patient. So I feel like his role worked on several different levels. Overall, I thought he was a good character.
All good points. There's not too much I will add to any of that right now, but we'll definitely kind of come back around, as this character is very important. Well, I guess to kind of give a little sidetrack, and this is something I would like to talk about more, maybe we can revisit. One of the effective things about the film, it's always tricky to kind of do this. There's a lot of things that you could say, well, this is on the nose, or you could say it's thematic. I lean in this instance because I think it's a very tight script and the performances are generally very tight, and because it's juggling so many plot threads that have a thematic connection, I'm much more forgiving in the sense that you've got a lot of parallels happening with the various plot lines. You've got even the title, it's sort of on the nose at a few points. I want to believe. Mulder wants to believe that he's doing the right thing and that these things are real. I mean, it's the classic Mulder quest. Like you mentioned, Scully wants to believe that there is hope in her religious beliefs and then also science and medicine, and that what she's doing, this suffering, actually has a purpose. Father Joe wants to believe that redemption's possible and that forgiveness and all of this is possible. And then, of course, the villains and their goals, it's a little more mysterious, but you have 4 tracks going through at the same time. The 5th sort of counter in there, and that's in Scully's plotline in particular, is Father Ibarra. And I'm not sure that his performance works. On paper, I think everything that comes out that's on the script that comes out of his mouth is good. But I really think one of the major missteps of the film is his portraying the boss of Scully as a villain. Because all of the comments he's making and the actions of the rest of the hospital staff, like in the board meeting, it is arguably very rational and compassionate. But for some reason, the actor decided to make him into a villain, or at least antagonistic, which makes the dichotomy of the entire film weak. Because you could go, if we look at the villains and why they're doing it, once you find out, you could say that there is an arguable sympathetic motivation, even though they're murderers. It's not so simple. It's not so cut and dry that they're just murderers. There's something else behind it. But with him, it just seemed unnecessary. I'm not sure if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I obviously don't like him as a character. I'm not sure, to be honest with you, how completely realistic in even his role is. I mean, he's a priest. I guess he's also involved in hospital administration. But for him to take such a antagonistic, direct role in what a doctor wants to do with the patient, even though, the whole stem cell argument has, ethical, moral concerns and all that, it seemed a little bit unrealistic to me. I work in a hospital, clinical-like setting, and not a Catholic hospital, mind you, but I don't know. Part of me just wondered if that character wasn't reaching a little bit. A great actor, but yeah, I didn't really care much for his role. It seemed like it was only there to serve one small purpose, and he was on screen a little bit too much for that one purpose.
If you go back to the boardroom scene, there's the other doctor, I'm assuming it's a doctor, who says to Scully, come on, don't put that boy through hell.
Right.
And if the Father Ybarra role could have been played the same way, which is, honestly, in this situation, if we're in a real world and we're not in the X-Files, where we know that magical science or fringe science has this chance, they have got a real point. And I think that was the only scene where it really landed. And then the other scenes with Father Ybarra just kind of weakened that. And I think that's an interesting question that the film is trying to make, is at what cost should these risks, go? So in the sense with the villains who are hurting other people with the goal of saving their partner or murdering other people to try and save their partner's life, well, Scully at the same point here, we could say it's altruistic, and that she is trying to save this boy's life because she cares, but that's not the truth, and that's where the film has a little bit more depth, is that it's also because of something that she needs to prove for herself. Yes, of course, she's a kind person and compassionate. She wants to save the boy, but there's more to it. There is a risk that she is using hubris and hurting the child unnecessarily. And so I think that could have been a very interesting plot debate if it weren't for that character. So that's why I'm rambling so much. Maybe let's, cut straight to, this is a big one, and I think it's a little problematic. We've got the villains here, which we eventually learn that I think the doctor and then the organ trafficker are Russian speakers. We don't know more about that than that. The partner who is being transferred head onto different bodies was a victim of Father Joe. So we're getting a little bit of, on one hand, we could say it's a sympathetic perspective on the villain's situation and adds some complexity, but there's also some real problems. Some of the things that make me a little uncomfortable about the film and about to be a real strong champion of it is that there is a thread of xenophobia happening, a lot of othering, that the villains, while their motives could be compassionate, they're really playing up the accents. They don't give us subtitles. The main organ trafficker has got bad teeth. They focus on that. There's also potential elements of homophobia happening here. So I was going to throw that to you and see what you think and how you wrestle or whether these provide any issues with you or what your perspectives are.
Well, that's an interesting point. I hadn't really considered the xenophobic argument before. I had heard the homophobic argument, and actually, maybe to give it a little bit of context, Darren Morgan's episode, Mulder and Scully Meet the Weremonster in Season 10, had faced some degree of criticism as being transphobic, because there is some dialogue in that episode about what it means to be a transgendered individual, and it didn't come off funny. It came off very awkward. And I certainly don't think that was the intent of anyone involved there, but there have been arguments about the show before, lack of representation of LGBT individuals. The episode X-Cops from Season 7 had a portrayal of a stereotypical gay couple, which, while one of my favorite episodes and played to comedic effect and I think very funny, did... and that was the mid-90s. So, I mean, some of that, I'm not excusing it by any means, but some of that was rampant in the culture at that time. So this is not a new criticism. For this film, I don't know. I certainly don't think their intent was to be homophobic, but then again, so often in literature, film, sometimes it is, even though if your intent is not. So, I mean, I can understand why some individuals would argue that it, xenophobic, homophobic, things like that.
One of the concerns I have is that even if we give it the benefit of the doubt and say, yeah, okay, it's a positive portrayal, or not positive. Of course, I was going to say that, but it's a neutral portrayal because it kind of fits the needs of the character. It falls back on a few tropes and stereotypes that are also problematic. For example, the fact that the victim of the priest was then, there is this question of at the age of when the assault occurred, did that affect their orientation? Because there is that stereotype and that question there that perhaps, homosexuality is a product of abuse. I know the film isn't saying it, but that is still the connection between our three main, the Father Joe and then the two villains.
Right.
So there is that issue, and you could instead, I think, could have done something more interesting on the cycle of abuse. If you didn't go this direction in particular, combined with the xenophobic aspect, it just makes it pretty uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. I like the concept of the villains if we abstract away from that, and being that they do have a sympathetic idea, and that they're sort of paralleling Scully's forays into fringe science, and fringe medical science in particular. That all works.
Right.
If we could just kind of get away from it. It's similar with Father Ybarra in the fact of why do you need to portray this as a villain? You don't need it. You could just have it be a counter opinion and you still get the antagonism to drive the plot forward. It makes it stronger. Same thing here. Why do they need to have bad teeth, strong accents? What does this add to it? Mm-hmm. They're killing people. We don't need to do it. That's one of the things that always drew me to Millennium. It's not a perfect show, but one of the main things it tries to do is focus on either the motivation behind or the cause or the trauma relating to the villain at the time and contrasting that with our main characters. And that's where I think John Kenneth Muir and other smarter media analysts and myself found the parallels with this film. But while Millennium isn't perfect, I don't think in general, I mean, they've got some iffier issues. I think they would try to, especially the organ trafficker, I think would do a little bit better job of humanizing the motivations behind it, or at least providing some sort of mental illness, as opposed to, what do we know about them? Okay, they're a same-sex couple and they're foreigners. Mm-hmm. So... Not to beat a dead horse, but it's the big red flag that's hurting an otherwise, I think, great film.
Sure, yeah.
So as long as Andrew is still awake after that, we'll head over.
No, I'm here.
All right. I've got a few other things to talk about, but maybe I'll turn it over to you and see what are some of the things you'd like to talk about.
Well, let's see here. I think the film benefits from some really good acting. I think you have some great acting here from Gillian Anderson. David Duchovny as well. But Gillian Anderson has the more emotional role in this film. I mean, she's doing double duty with her relationship with Mulder, kind of front and center, as well as her struggle with the hospital administration, trying to find treatments and everything for her patients. So there's some great interactions with her, with Father Joe. One of my favorite scenes in the film is the scene where she confronts Father Joe about why he told her not to give up. What did he mean by that? Why was he directing that at her? He throws scripture at her, and she's Catholic. Don't you throw scripture at me? She knows it. She was raised the same environment he was raised in, the same environment he worked in for so many years. They have so many commonalities, and yet she's completely disgusted by him. And I think that plays off really well throughout the film. One thing that I did want to comment on was the parallels. I mean, they're obvious, but the parallels between Scully's patient, Christian, the young boy with Sandhoff disease, and Mulder and Scully's son, William. Mm-hmm. William is only mentioned directly once, I believe, in this film when Mulder and Scully, Mulder mentions their son's name to her briefly. But there is a really good scene that sometimes gets overlooked, I think, when the parents of Christian, the young boy she's treating, have talked to Father Ybarra. He's obviously had some influence over their decision. They tell her they want to stop treatment. and she poses to them, what if this worked? I don't want to give up. And the mother says, if you had a child, you'd understand. And there's no obvious moment where it's moments of silence, her face is all contorted. There's nothing like that, but there's the briefest flicker of, all right, you said that, I'm going to ignore that. She's thinking of her own son, and I just thought that was really well played. I think that credit lies in the script as well as Gillian Anderson, of course. I really thought there were some great parallels that played out. For not having William in the film directly, obviously, his presence is there in this subplot with Scully and her patient. I think there's some great acting here, and I think there's some great characterization here. One of the things that I love about this film is that I just feel like 6 years after Mulder's tried for murder in the series finale, he escapes, their lives are seemingly in danger. You fast forward 6 years later, you see them living together. This is the first time you see them really in a domestic situation, and it's believable. They are older, they are worn down. In a way, it feels like the original characters, and yet they're different, and they should be different because it's been 6 years since we last saw them. They're grown up. It's realistic to where they are in their lives. Mulder still has that obsession with what happened to his sister. Is paranormal phenomena real? Scully doesn't really want that to be a part of their lives anymore, and that's something that she struggles with in the film, explicitly and implicitly. She doesn't, she says she doesn't want that darkness in their home, and who can blame her? I mean, you had 9 years of them losing family members, and I felt like this was a film that actually acknowledged the fact that these characters have been through hell and back several times, and that they're tired, and at least Scully is done with it, and as she should be. And I felt like this film really took that into account when they built the characters.
I completely agree with that last point about the tiredness and how Anderson plays it. I think Duchovny plays it very well, too, in the sense of being tired and gets a small taste of it, and how he kind of phases back into the drive and the passion from the bit. So I agree with all of that. I have a quick question for you, Andrew. Are you a shipper?
If you mean in the sense that, do I believe Mulder and Scully should be together? I would say yes, and I think that this film, while certainly a shipper film in the sense that, we have Mulder and Scully in a romantic relationship living together, it feels to me like that's just what it should be. I mean, after all that they've been through. So I guess by that definition, yeah, I do tend towards the shippery parts of the fandom. I liked how throughout most, not all, but most of the original series, there was that steady but extremely slow buildup of, will they, won't they sexual tension. But at the root of that, there was always that friendship and that relatability. And it felt like a natural progression in season 7 when it grew into a extremely implicit, Chris Carter doesn't write that very well in my opinion, but it's a very implicit romantic relationship that develops about midway through season 7, and we see brief glimpses of it in season 8 as well. So yeah, I would cop to the shipper argument.
One of the reasons I ask, or probably the main reason I ask, is fandom generally gives this a negative review often. And I'm fairly surprised that this shipper community is not more vocally defensive about it, as all those reasons you mentioned, that is a real highlight of the film. It portrays their relationship, I think, phenomenally well, and the chemistry behind them really gets a chance to shine. That one moment where Scully wakes up or can't sleep or something, and Mulder and her have a conversation, that whole scene is really good. And the chemistry behind the two, especially when, like Anderson states, the scratchy beard line. It is, I think, a particularly effective film, and considering the arc of the film, starting off where they're at, kind of tired, and then ending up with the post-credit scene in the boat, they earned it. It's rarely, I think, in a 2-hour film with characters of this much history that you can end on that high note and feel that's where the characters need to be, that's where they should be, and feel pretty comfortable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and if I can add, I will say that I think when production got underway in 2015 for season 10, and it was announced that Mulder and Scully were no longer a couple, there was a lot of consternation stirred up in the fan community, particularly among shippers, but even beyond shippers. I mean, I think even if you're not a shipper, I think you can recognize the fact that you go from 2002, where Mulder and Scully are on the run, clearly a romantic couple, they are grieving the loss of their son. You go 6 years later to 2008 with I Want to Believe. They are a romantic couple, still grieving the loss of their son, and they have problems in their relationship. And the film, in fact, towards the end, does hint at the fact that their relationship is not exactly in the best place. They care about each other, they love each other, but they have some conflicts that could potentially haunt their relationship. It didn't come to me as a surprise that Chris Carter chose to break them up for season 10, but I don't feel like it played very well in season 10. I feel like the breakup was done for no real reason. We got no real explanation of it, and it just kind of was there. So I think some fans are going to probably reevaluate I Want to Believe down the road, especially depending with what Chris Carter chooses to do in season 11. And I think I Want to Believe will be viewed kind of as that well-made moment when Chris Carter really did choose to have these characters in a believable romantic domestic relationship.
And I'm going to piggyback on your points in agreement and note that they are having problems in this film. It's clearly portrayed, and there is quite a bit of distance in their relationship. In fact, it's implied, at least to me, that they don't actually live in the same place, but often, Scully may visit or vice versa. It's kind of ambiguous because it seems like she is visiting him at the beginning.
I've wondered that myself too. I really have, since seeing the film over the years. Because it looks like their home, and it looks like a home that would be well kept. But yeah, they don't exactly. I mean, you only see her in the home on a couple of occasions. So that was something that was perhaps intentionally left a little vague.
And it's also tricky because of the beard joke and whether that's supposed to be a surprise to Scully too or just the audience. So we don't know how soon they've seen him. But to go back to your point really quick so we don't lose that train of thought is you have the 9 seasons of all of this crazy stuff that happened, Mulder's erratic behavior, and they're still able to maintain some sort of relationship. It's still complicated, but they have that distance. And at that point, I don't understand why it wouldn't keep going. It is possible that, Scully would get too fatigued and split up, and that's where season 10 goes. But I strangely think it's almost more plausible to keep them together, but from this distant, working friendship partner. Because it seems to me like Scully is always going to be independent and busy enough that she's not going to be somebody who's going to ditch Mulder because she needs a full-time, high-maintenance, codependent partner. But
no. That's fair. No.
It seems like they're both in a good place in the sense of they found their boundaries. They know each other. They know each other's problems. And they put fences up around that. So we from the outside go and see, and this is a dysfunctional relationship as opposed to being a functional relationship from two highly dysfunctional people. Even though Scully's very functional in some ways, in other ways, when it comes to dealing with boundaries and the rest, nobody's perfect.
Exactly. And I think it would have been really effective. It would have been a change. It would have been something new to see Mulder and Scully together as we saw them in I Want to Believe, but investigating the standalone Monster of the Week X-File cases in season 10. And in a way, perhaps not what Chris Carter intended, but in a way that is what we got because it's addressed that the whole reason, not to bleed too much into my struggle and all that, but Mulder suffered from depression. Well, that's obvious, and I Want to Believe. I mean, that's not a surprise. He is a rather melancholy, at times pessimistic character. That's Mulder. That's always been Mulder. So to throw that out and say that Scully couldn't take his depression after so many years, I mean, that kind of felt like a cop-out. But other episodes, the Were Monster episode, Founders Meet, you see them together, and they have such a close relationship that it almost plays as if they are together. So the whole fact that he broke them up, it just felt like it wasn't there was no real point to it. It didn't add tension. It didn't add any new plot points or anything. It just felt like an exercise in futility, to be honest. So I would have rather him kept them together. Let's explore what their relationship looks like when they are in close quarters working together, because we never really got to see that a lot in the original series. Not in a true, romantic relationship sense, post I Want to Believe.
And there's so much you can explore. And I Want to Believe even shows this, that because they're such dynamic personalities, and Scully is so proactive in her professional life, and Mulder having his disparate, chaotic interests between the two, you've got plenty of room for drama. And your point about the depression is totally well taken. Go back to season 1. Mulder is depressed. And then you go to season 2 with the Green Little Men. This same issue has been going on forever. This is nothing new. Mm-hmm. Scully's also a medical doctor. This is not something that's going to be a surprise to her all of a sudden 20 years down the road. Oh, he's got depression due to childhood trauma and perhaps a clinical reason. Who knows? But yeah, it didn't seem true, especially when it gets to, like you were mentioning, in season 10, and then getting to Home Again with the scene of Mulder supporting Scully with the death of her mother and all of this. And that felt really true, but that scene also makes it seem insane that they would have split up from the very casual relationship, because neither of them moved on to anything else, and they still maintained their friendship. So the difference between where they are in I Want to Believe and where they are in Home Again is almost nil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
A lot of debate in here about causality, and I think it's done fairly well in the sense that the script doesn't attempt to answer it, but it just puts these questions in here to antagonize Scully, and I think Anderson handles it fairly well. So, for example, back we were talking earlier when Scully goes to visit Father Joe, and he mentions, he's self-castrated, and he says to her, where do these sick appetites come from? Mm-hmm. And so she's kind of challenged with this issue, and then also the issue of suffering of the children, the challenge to her faith. And that, I think, provides a nice arc for her that doesn't even really get answered. Mm-hmm. In a lot of other films and a lot of other TV shows, even perhaps some other X-Files episode, there would be a sign or there would be something that would provide this answer. But it doesn't really happen. Mm-hmm. She does, in a sense, is able to save Mulder due to the actions, but that, in a sense, only provides a challenge further to Scully in the sense of her doubting Father Joe in the first place, and then challenging the fact that somebody like him could actually do something good, but it doesn't address the actual challenge to Scully's beliefs, which I think is nice to kind of leave that open.
Yeah, I think the film thrives on ambiguity. There's not a lot of hard answers, but I just feel like that goes with the style of the film. It's a slow, meditative, heavily atmospheric kind of film. And the show, I mean, you're right, the show has always posed big questions in not only the mythology episodes, but in many of the great standalone Monster of the Week episodes. I know Chris Carter has said, probably ad nauseum, that he doesn't consider himself a religious person. He considers himself a person who wants to believe, and that's where that whole I want to believe phrase comes from. And he doesn't believe, I think, in the show giving hard, definitive answers, which probably relates to his inability to keep certain elements of the mythology straight over so many decades. But he's always toying with new concepts, and I think part of that comes from that belief that there's a truth out there, but we can't really know it. And so I think the film really has that theme at its heart. There's stuff that we're never going to know the answer to through science, through faith, and that is really, I think, what the film's about. And I felt like the film was very effective in that portrayal.
And building on that, this film also has an analogy to one of my top X-Files episodes, which is Beyond the Sea. And you have a similar progression with Scully, in the sense of dealing with someone that is ethically very negative, with Luther Lee Boggs, who even gets a call-out in this movie, and dealing with the fact of the ambiguity idea of, needing to know what her father said. If anything, is this an illusion? But still that there are good results or progress happening through some sort of dance with the devil of sorts of getting the information. But in the end, Scully is left with nothing. Mm-hmm. It's a nice thing to see that they can redo that plot line, but do it in a new way that isn't too on the nose.
Yeah.
What I'll do now is I'm going to do a little speed round, if that's okay. I'm going to bring up a few things, and you can just give me a real fast response. Yeah. Okay. So, and you can say, and I'm going to do a few that are like, on the nose, so there'll be some topics like that. Is this too on the nose, or did you find it amusing? Is it fun? Okay. George Bush photo, X-Files music plays.
On the nose.
Okay, unfortunately. Why do you think they had to green screen Mulder and the one organ trafficker looking over the cliff?
I don't know. But if it's a scene I think you're talking about and how it shows in the film, that was kind of like, what happened in the editing room there? It was pretty obvious.
Compared to the rest of the settings, I just don't understand what happened. Maybe the sky was highly contrasting. I don't know. Yeah. It just stood out. Not a big deal. It's a production issue. We love you, film crew. You did a great job. We're not trying to hurt you here. Multi-headed dog. Yay or nay?
Oh, I have to say nay.
Why? Hurt the dog's feelings.
It didn't bother me, but I guess in rewatching it recently, it just... I don't know. I could see how it would upset some people. It's actually a fairly graphic scene. You know, you see part of the one head of the dog, bloodied and obviously dead. It didn't bother me, but I could see as someone who is a dog lover, it might be a little too in your face.
Oh, she mean nay in the sense of it's violent, not in the sense of it's an ineffective.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. It's effective. It is effective in the sense that, it leads into this whole Frankenstein, head transplant idea. A little gruesome.
Does it look okay?
It looks good, yeah. I'd say so.
Okay. Even though the dog... I comment only because the one dog's head is smashed. The other dog looks really adorable.
Yeah.
And they didn't even give any makeup to put some blood on it or anything. It just is this really cute-looking... Yep. Rottweiler.
Yeah, that...
Like, oh, it's a sweet monster. I want to give it a hug.
That's right.
Oh. One thing that is an actual leap that doesn't work with the psychic stuff, and I can't really find a way to explain it very well, is the fact that Scully stumbles across the research with the Russian doctors.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel about that?
That kind of came out of nowhere. I mean, I don't think anybody, even the best scholar, can find anything on Google that quickly. That kind of just...
Well, but she wasn't looking for it. It just happened.
Right. Right. It's another example of kind of these opportunistic,
Yep.
You kind of just have to take it and go on, and it advances the narrative. I guess it does the job. It just sometimes strains credibility.
One of my favorite things about the film is the scene towards the end when Mulder confronts the doctors working in there, and I think Duchovny plays an exhausted, nearly delirious Mulder really well. Mm-hmm. What do you think about that scene? Argue against me.
Yeah, no, that's a great scene.
Wait, Andrew, you're supposed to argue against me. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's a great scene. You got Mitch Pileggi coming in there, saving the day, so I can't argue against him. But no, that was a nice... I liked that kind of the climax of that film. I liked how... you kind of verge into real horror at that point. I thought it was effective. I thought it was real effective. I thought Mulder played it real well, and that whole scene when you just it's finally laid out before you. It's just creepy as hell.
Oh boy! So, are you familiar with Sarah Jane Redmond? Did you watch Millennium?
I have seen some of Millennium. Yeah.
Do you know who she is?
In this movie or in Millennium?
Both.
Did she play? Was she Dakota Whitney's boss in I Want to Believe?
I don't know if it was a boss because it wasn't very clear. She was standing in the background when Mulder first met Dakota Whitney and kind of looks suspicious. Right. And then later she answers the phone and hands it to Drummy when Scully calls. And then eventually Scully hooks up with Skinner. It kind of sets up like she's going to be a character and nothing happens. And her name's even kind of featured in the credits. So my hunch was, she was such a fan favorite and phenomenal in Millennium that the X-Files Millennium crew probably like, we got to put her in this movie. We don't have a role. We'll just put her here. Yeah. But it's still cool to see her. I just wish, give her something to do, please.
Yeah, right.
Okay, and then we've got, of course, if I'm pronouncing this correct, Alex Daikun, who is the Russian doctor, who is Darren Morgan's favorite actor and has been in tons of episodes. And the feed store owner that Mulder talks to played the chief in the FBI in Millennium Season 3. So we got a lot of old favorites here kind of settling down. Before we get to our summary opinions, do you have any final things you want to touch on?
I think the film benefits from Frank Spotnitz as a co-writer. I don't want to harp too much on Season 10, but in a way, I go back to this always comparing the film with what we see come next in Season 10. And like I said, fortunately, Season 10 is not the end for the X-Files. We have another season coming out in early 2018. But one question I guess I wanted to ask you, what do you think, if I Want to Believe truly was the end of the series and something happened, the actors wouldn't come back, there's going to be no more X-Files as we know it, what would you think of I Want to Believe through the lens of it being the absolute end of the franchise?
It's perfect. I wouldn't change it. I don't think that you could come up with... perfect isn't fair, but if we take the odds of getting a better ending based on the entire catalog of the X-Files, and especially looking at Season 10, what are the odds that we could get a tighter, more emotionally resonant, ethically connected, in the sense of the issues of ethics that the X-Files have dealt with? Of course, there's ethical problems with the movie, but overall... and a strong character piece, I don't think you could top it. Of course you could, but our odds, if we rolled that dice, were more likely to end up with another existence or the sixth extinction or something to that degree that's way too heavy on purple prose, or even My Struggle, it's so over the top, it doesn't have anything to do with the characters we care about.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I think this would have been a fantastic ending.
Well, not to disappoint you, but I 100% agree with you.
Dang,
I really do.
you.
I really do think, and like I said, for a while, 2012 came and went, the colonization came and went, there wasn't a third film, and I really didn't think there was going to be, and I was okay with that, because I felt like the characters had come to a natural ending point, and like you said, I want to see it neatly tied up, I want to see themes resonant and echoing throughout the whole series, I want some degree of continuity with the characters and the MSR, and I really do think I Want to Believe gave us that. And it's hard not to look back at the film, knowing what we know now about Season 10 and whatever someone's opinions of Season 10 are, the fact alone that it ends on a cliffhanger was a major gamble, but the fact that the characters, they just feel a little bit different, and it didn't feel like a natural return to the characters. One of the big things of I Want to Believe, Scully does not want to return to the FBI, that's abundantly clear. She does not want the darkness in her home. Well, within My Struggle, it takes a matter of minutes for her to toss that out the window, and she's back in the FBI, and that is not true to the character. That's not true to their emotional journey, and that probably is the number one complaint I have out of Season 10 for that.
Yeah, again, this maybe isn't our place to get too far into Season 10, but in contrast to I Want to Believe is Season 10's one of its major issues is that you've already got 9 years worth of plot threads. Many of them are left dangling and they're quiet and they're fine. Some of them are just ignored. And the solution is not to look at I Want to Believe, which is let's introduce something and wrap it up. Let's keep something nice and tight. No, instead, we're just going to introduce a bunch, give no room for character development, and then leave it dangling open. This is the mistake the entire series made that alienated a lot of viewers. Why would you repeat that? You already have so much you need to work with. Why do you need to retcon anything? Why would you do that unless it gives you a special plot dynamic or some sort of character growth? And that's not what happened. In particular, you can't. How can you jump from My Struggle to Meets the Weremonster? It doesn't feel natural. So I think Season 10 should have started small. That's what it should have done, just like I Want to Believe, and maybe build up into something like My Struggle, not even My Struggle 2, but this idea of we got 6 hours and we're just going to throw this random disparate stuff. I Want to Believe has a singular focus. We're going to work on a few ideas and a few concepts, our characters, and we're going to keep it consistent and clear so we can actually tell a story. But there I am venting. You shouldn't have brought this up, Andrew. You turned me into a real monster here. Frankensteinian.
But no, that's I have to say, where we are now, and like I said, I hope beyond hope that Season 11 is an improvement on Season 10, and I really do. And be it the ending or not, I don't know. But as it stands right now, I Want to Believe is the best ending we could have had, and it's the truest to the characters that we've known for 20 plus years.
You know that we could get in some real dachshund threats from some of the X-Files fans out there for saying that. You're going out on a real limb here, Andrew. You got guts of steel.
I know it. It's a good thing this is just Just audio. They can't see my face.
Oh, man. Well, yeah, some of these people have got drones right outside your window. But unfortunately, I agree with you. It's a great ending, and it's not a perfect film, but hey, I think it was Ebert. I also read his review after Kenneth Muir talked about it.
Well, actually, it's funny you bring that up because I have the review right here. I wanted to actually reference it. There's a quote. There's a couple in here. He gave it's a 3.5 out of 4-star review. So I mean, it's a great rated movie from Roger Ebert.
Thanks for backing us up, Ebert.
He said, I had the sensation of looking at real people in real spaces, not motion capture in CGI spaces. There was a tangible quality to the film that made the suspense more effective because it involved the physical world. And then in closing, just one quick line, he says, and I quote, "The movie works like thrillers used to work before they were required to contain villains the size of buildings." And I remember reading that review actually right before or maybe right after I saw the film, and it's true. It's an intimate. I saw someone review it very favorably right before the miniseries last year came out, and they said if Fight the Future is a big budget CGI effects show, then I Want to Believe is an intimate chamber drama. And I thought that was a great way to describe it because it's true. It's an intimate character piece, like we've said so many times, and it's also a thriller, but it relies on the acting, it relies on the writing and the emotion that you see on the screen.
Fantastic, and good job having that review pulled up. Wow, okay, well this has been a real nightmare talking with you, but before we end it, let's go through and maybe tell me what you would rate this out of 10 and give me a few pros and a few cons to the film.
All right. Out of 10, I would probably give it an 8.5. I feel pros, obviously, the characterization of Mulder and Scully here is just realistic and emotional, and I just feel like it's very a real natural conclusion, or could have been, rather, a conclusion to the characters and the story as a whole. The cinematography is beautiful in this. The atmosphere is there. It's Vancouver. It's 1995 again. They couldn't have done better, in my opinion, on the editing, on the cinematography of the whole piece. Cons, there are parts, like we've touched on here, where the script does suffer a little bit with some of those secondary characters, like Father Ybarra. A little bit of stodgy dialogue here and there. But overall, it's harder for me to list some of the cons because I just feel like there's so many more positive elements to it, and I felt like this was just, with Frank Spotnitz on board, he really helped Chris Carter keep the writing in line and the production detail in line, and you just got a really good conclusion to the characters that is believable and true to who they are.
Fantastic. Honestly, an 8.5 sounds pretty reasonable. It's jumping between 8 and 9. I'm going to have to go for an 8 with the context that I think to get a 10, you have to try to hit it out of the park. I think for this film, they were trying to hit a double or a triple. They wanted to just hit something there. They're not going for a Clyde Bruckman's Final Repose or anything too adventurous. And I think in that instance, but they nailed it. And it's a smart move. So I'm going to give it a solid 8. And I'm going to say one of my favorite things about the film, which we haven't talked about, is the soundtrack. I think it's the best X-Files soundtrack out there.
Yeah.
Snow does a fantastic job. The cinematography, I actually had that written down too. Specifically the snow and the light. They really have got a great atmosphere here. Even the scene in the swimming pool and all the rest. The best part about it is it's not too showy. You've got a few, wide shots that kind of give you a real sense of atmosphere, but the camera's generally pretty still, and it's not trying to do too much. It's still telling a story. It honestly feels sometimes like a BBC prestige in the way the pacing is done in these shots compared to, or like you're saying, a traditional X-Files episode, but compared to a lot of other thrillers that would be done like this. So I think it works really well. It keeps the tone there. Oregon Harvesting, this is a mod pro, a very medium one kind of talked about, but that's a real trope that can be exploited, and they could have just done an Oregon Harvesting thing done a different way. But the fact that it is done for this Frankenstein for someone's partner, there is sort of this compassionate angle to it, even with all the other problems. I'll give it some credit for doing something new, sort of new, with that trope. Cons, we talked about already, the issues of xenophobia or homophobia potentially. Honestly, the other thing I don't really care for is some of the attempts at action. The city chase, I don't think really fits the film at all, especially when you can see some of the other ways they got action that worked pretty well. Cars being run off the road works well. The opening scene where they're spearing the ice, cutting back between the past and the present, those are really effective, tense action scenes. And just this standard one kind of stales out the thing. Doesn't hurt the film too much, but it is a con. Any final comments before we engage in a long-distance screaming match?
I think we'd all be good to really re-examine the film. I think it offers a lot. I think it's seriously underrated in the fan community and the critical community. I think if you want the characters where they are after 9 years of the series, and like I said, through hell and back, this is where they are, and it's true to them. So, like I said, we've kind of said that probably, ad nauseum throughout here, but I just feel like you couldn't get a tighter, truer ending than I Want to Believe, and fortunately I don't see them being able to top that ending.
Well, I would just like to close by saying you're wrong, Andrew. You're terribly, horribly wrong, and I'm sick to my stomach. This was the worst recording experience of my life. And in all seriousness, Andrew, thanks so much for joining me. This has been a great chat. I really appreciate all of your fantastic input. Our next Podwatch episode is going to be 104, and they're going to be jumping into Season 10, and we're going to be discussing My Struggle and Founder's Mutation. If you want to follow the XCast, you can join us on Twitter at the X_cast, and the Facebook page and group, the XCast X-Files Podcast Fan Group. Andrew, thanks again for coming on and talking about I Want to Believe.
Thanks, Russ. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
Your lies are so appreciated. But until next time, trust no one.